The alternate Earth presented to us in the Fallout universe is one straight out of our worst nightmares. In a world where dangerous horrors are lurking around every corner, there are few things that are more terrifying than the possibility of global nuclear war. For unless you're one of the diligent few who have made extensive preparations to shelter yourself and your loved ones in the case of such an event, or you happen to live in an area that isn't directly in the line of fire, or subject to the mass amounts of fallout or other various harmful byproducts of this type of catastrophe, the average person can do little to prevent the death or horrifying amounts of harm inflicted upon them, if they manage to live, should those at the top choose to press their respective buttons. And unfortunately, it could potentially happen at any time. Now, in a world where this has happened, survival becomes the end-all be-all of existence, especially in one like we see in Fallout, where it's not just the radiation and other survivors one has to contend with, but mutated animals and humans making an already treacherous wasteland all the more treacherous. But even these creatures, as terrifying as they can be, are also trying to survive. And just as humans do, some of them band together in order to create makeshift civilizations, communities, religious orders, and even governments, ushering in a new world order as the old world crumbles beneath the radiated dust. A world that was nearly dominated in totality by our subject of this video, the Holy Flame, the Dark God, and the Father of Hope himself, the Master, and his all-consuming hive mind of mutants. Hello everyone, and welcome to the 234th episode of Analyzing Evil. Last time we entered the Fallout universe in one of these episodes was at the request of the patrons and members, who chose Mr. House to be their pick for a video in March of 2024. And now they've once again requested that I make my return to this series by covering one of the most requested characters from it. As the first big bad of the series, the Master is a remarkably excellent villain, one that has managed to remain at the forefront of fans of this series' minds for nearly 30 years now. A man-turned-mutant-turned half-machine, half-mutant hybrid hive mind, hell-bent on bringing back this world from the brink, that's as captivating as they are terrifying. And in this video, we're going to explore everything that has made this character an icon of video game villainy, and one of the greatest villains to come out of this timeless series. Before we continue, I will mention that I'll be using information from the Fallout Bible in this video, and though its canonicity is up for debate, I think it has a lot of information in it that enhances the Master's character, and so I've used some of the information we can find there to bolster my analysis of them. Now without further ado, let's begin. While being born after the Great War that destroyed the world must be a horrid thing for anyone to have to experience, being born before everything was destroyed is arguably worse. You've already tasted what it's like to live in a world full of life and wonder, and so to be denied these things must be an infinitely harder thing to endure than to live never having experienced them at all. At least in this universe, the horrors of the outside world were alleviated for the lucky few who found themselves near or inside a vault when the bombs dropped in October of 2077. But even then, going from living in a world relatively untouched by horror to one dominated by it, whilst also eking out your existence in a tin can, isn't exactly comforting. Perhaps such uneasiness is what ended up driving the man who would one day become the Master, Richard Moreau, to murder one of his fellow vault dwellers, and set him on the path towards becoming so much more than just a simple survivor. According to First Citizen Joanne Lynette of Vault City, Richard Moreau was a citizen of Vault 8, the vault closest to Vault-Tech's main facility, whose citizens were charged with repopulating the Earth in the event of a nuclear war. However, when Vault 8 was given the all-clear, and shortly after its citizens established Vault City, Richard was exiled by his fellow dwellers for the crime of murder, setting off into the unknown on his own, before he eventually made his way to the hub, where he took on the name Richard Grey shortly after arriving there.
Quite impossible. In the century we have lived outside the vault, no one has ever chosen to leave. Although there were 2 citizens exiled from our city long ago, as punishment for their crimes. Murderers, both of them. Boyarsky was exiled 10 years ago, and Richard Moreau was exiled shortly after we left the vault. Citizenship is a sacred trust. Crime is not tolerated within our walls.
The thing about this bit of information, though, is that we have no way of verifying whether or not it's true. And if we look to an answer to a question posed to Chris Avallone that we can find in the Fallout Bible, it becomes even more murky. So Richard Grey was the first vault dweller, not the main character in FO1. And why did he leave his vault? According to Lynette in Fallout 2, Richard was exiled from Vault 8 for murder. The details of the murder are unknown, and judging from the hypocrisy filling Vault City, the entire incident is questionable. So whether or not it's true that Richard Moreau was exiled from his vault for murdering someone is up for debate. And whether or not he actually did doesn't matter all too much in the grand scheme of things. but I'd like to think that people who enjoyed the protection of a group weren't typically too keen on leaving them for the great unknown that is the wasteland. So Richard getting into some sort of altercation with another vault dweller that then ended in murder and exile seems like a fairly solid reason for him to set out on his own. Though it is entirely possible that he desired to forge his own path in life and left his people because of that desire. Whatever the case may be, as I said earlier, Richard eventually made his way to the hub after he was exiled in 2092, where he changed his name and either continued to ply his trade as the doctor he already was, or made himself into one to reinvent himself into something more than he was during his time in the vault. A man who knew him at this time, Harold, described him like so.
Brilliant guy. A doctor and philosopher. Long ago, he led the expedition where I got changed into a mutant.
So from what little we know of Richard's character, he's a murderer, doctor, philosopher, and great man all in one. And as we'll soon discuss, who Richard was when he was just a man could be very crucial to understanding his transformation into something much more and much worse. Mankind sins well enough in our universe, but in the Fallout universe, the follies of pre-war Earth were not just found in the conditions that led to an all-out war between superpowers, but in the sinister experimentation that would lead to the advent of mutants in the post-war world. 24 years before the war began in 2053, a disease known as the New Plague began ravishing the world, with the US closing its borders after losing tens of thousands of people and ordering everyone into quarantine. 3 years later, the United States granted the ZAX 1.0 supercomputer system that was given to them by Vault-Tec to West-Tec at their research facility southwest of LA so they could begin engineering a virus that would wipe out the New Plague on behalf of the US government. Sadly, West-Tec was never able to engineer a cure for the New Plague, but their research into creating a new virus that could kill the New Plague eventually led to West-Tec being granted a contract by the US government and military, and in September of 2073, they attempted to create a countermeasure to Chinese bioweapons in the form of a general immunization agent, a project that was dubbed the Pan-Immunity Virion Project, or PvP. However, 2 years into their research, things would take an interesting turn, which is exemplified for us in a holodisk labeled FEV experiment disk that we can find in West-Tec's former research facility, now dubbed the Glow, in Fallout 1. Log date March 21st, 2075. Major Barnett has ordered experiments with batch 10-11 of Pan-Immunity Virion, which has been renamed FEV for Forced Evolutionary Virus. His main concern is with the side effects of the quad helix structure rather than its main effect of replicative stability. He believes the new structure is the next logical step for mammalian nuclei. Experiments with single-celled organisms is a great success. While their basal metabolism appears unchanged, their immunity to infection and radiation is exceeding all earlier expectations. Addendum: chloroplasts seem unaffected by the virion. Further experiments on plant cells have been cancelled by order of Major Barnett. Log date May 9th, 2075. We infected several species of flatworm with FEV. Within hours, the worms had increased in size by 28%, and 39 separate viral contagions were resisted by the population. Each sample was allowed to continue for several generations, and the new DNA structure was successfully passed on to worms' progeny, although only asexual reproduction was noticed in the samples. Experiments with insects have had less success. Major Barnett has postponed these experiments until further notice. Log date June 30th, 2075. Several lab strains of white mice have been infected successfully with FEV. Again, an increase in size was noted within hours, and after 9 days, all mice had stabilized at 31% larger than the control group. Dissection revealed the most increase in size in striated muscle tissue and certain internal organs, such as the liver, heart, and kidneys. In a surprising finding, the infected mice were found to run mazes in less than half of the time of the control group. More testing will be needed to confirm this finding as significant. Log date November 9th, 2075. We have infected 218 rabbits with FEV. Half of the subjects were implanted with electrodes to monitor EEG activity before and after the infection. Increased electrical activity in the brain was noted in 3.2 seconds, on average, after injection. Again, the typical size increase was noted. However, increased aggression and posturing, especially among males, was noted as well. Sacrifice and perfusion yielded brain tissue that showed increased dendritic connection, especially in the limbic system and frontal cortex. Log date January 12th, 2076. With batch 11-11, we've improved the mitotic cycle efficiency by 43%. We've infected 53 raccoons with the new strain. In addition to the now expected size increase, behavioral tests confirmed an increase in intelligence and manual dexterity by 19 points on the Schuler-Cap Index. Unfortunately, several subjects escaped confinement and had to be hunted down and dispatched. Major Barnett ordered the remaining subjects terminated. 2 pairs were unaccounted for. Log date May 13th, 2076. We have spliced several new gene sequences, supplied by Major Barnett's advisory team, into FEV. With batch 11-101A, we infected 23 dogs of both pure and mixed breed, and all of them experienced nearly immediate growth. The larger size was accompanied with increased aggressiveness, while no significant intelligence increase was noted. We plan to attempt crossover of 92 allele pairs with batch 11-11. All subjects were terminated after 14 weeks of study. Log date October 4th, 2076. The crossover has been completed, and 15 chimpanzees were infected with batch 11-111. Growth and immunity levels are unprecedented. Attempts to induce cancers in the subjects through radiological and chemical agents were not successful. Increased aggressiveness have led to isolating the subjects. 2 subjects suffered violent epileptic seizures and died. All remaining subjects terminated. That's not exactly what Westech was looking to achieve with this research. But as an unintended result of experimentation, this is about as good as it gets, especially for a company working on behalf of the US military, with the higher-ups, as you heard, being quite pleased with what Westech managed to accomplish here. That must have been all well and good for the military, but the rest of the world, not so much, as something this revolutionary and volatile was liable to cause many more problems than it was meant to solve, even before the war happened, especially when you consider the final entry in this data file. Log date January 7th, 2077. Major Barnett has ordered transfer of all FEV research to the Mariposa military base. He plans to continue the project experiments on volunteer subjects. I am against this, and would like it noted here that research on human subjects is not recommended by myself or my staff. As you might have guessed, the advancement to voluntary human experimentation was a slippery slope. And it wasn't long before involuntary experimentation began to take place at Mariposa, as well as in the Appalachian town of Huntersville, where the water supply was poisoned with FEV, so Westech might study its effects on the human body further. Here's what the Fallout Bible has to say about what went on in Mariposa after these human experiments began. Captain Roger Maxton and his men discovered that the scientists at Mariposa have been using military volunteers, that is military prisoners who didn't have their brains scooped for use in brain bots, as test subjects in their experiments. Morale in the base breaks down, and Maxton executes Anderson, the chief scientist. Not long after this, and in light of the mental breakdown of Colonel Spindle stationed at the base, Maxton's men turn to him for leadership. He shrugs and says, "We should quit." It's interesting to note that the Fallout Bible also states that several months before Captain Maxton staged his mutiny, that FEV research was leaked to the world through an unknown source, resulting in protests in many major cities and governments around the world, as well as accusations that the US was responsible for the new plague. It further states that FEV was seen as the threat it was, and only served to fuel tensions. And I couldn't really find anything else about this, aside from a mention of a leak in an article titled The Origins of Fallout by Scott Campbell, over on No Mutants Allowed. I tried to greatly hint that this research had gotten out, and that this information leak is possibly the catalyst that caused the missiles to be launched. Now this bit of information is interesting, because the cause of the Great War in the Fallout universe is essentially unknown, with only speculative theories providing us any sort of clarity on the issue. But in a lot of those theories, China is blamed for having started the war. And if that's true, it might make a whole lot of sense that the reason they bombed the US in the first place was because the US was developing a super mutant virus that could easily allow them to win future wars, or to send the world further into chaos if they were unable to control it. Which makes even more sense when you consider that the Westech research facility was targeted during the war, and now lies as the ruin known as the Glow. However, Westech was also responsible for much more militarily than just engineering FEV. So it is possible that the facility was targeted simply because it was a military research facility. Ultimately, whether or not any of this is true doesn't matter all too much, nor does it change anything about the Master and their story. But it was a fun bit of information I came across that I thought I'd share with all of you regardless. Now who knows what Westech and the US government may have unleashed on the world with FEV had the war not occurred, but it did. And after the bombs fell, unlike the Westech research facility, Mariposa Base came out unscathed. But fearing that this would soon change, Captain Maxton ordered his forces to vacate the base to make for the Lost Hills, leaving it unattended and abandoned. Over time, the base became as derelict and decrepit as any other structure. But this was no ordinary building. It was a certified biohazard holding a virus that could transform an already ravaged world into something even more horrifying. And slowly but surely, that started to become a reality. As Mariposa decayed, many unfortunate creatures would find their way into its depths through cracks and holes, transforming them into hideous mutant monstrosities that, upon re-emerging into the world, began to target any unmutated creatures they could find, including humans who happened upon their paths in caravans. And as time passed, these attacks only became more frequent, which brings us back to Richard Gray and his tragic transformation into one of the greatest threats this new world has ever known, only 10 years following his exile from Vault City. Harold, the mutant we meet in many Fallout entries, first made his appearance in the hub in Fallout 1, where, as I've already mentioned, we learn a bit more about Richard's story.
The whole thing? Well, after the Great War, my vault was one of the first to open. Phew, long time. All started with the sirens. I was young, but I do remember that. A lot of terrible years followed, and I remember walking out of the vault late one morning. Well, I was a trader. Did pretty good making a circuit between survivors. Lost a lot of good people, though. Gangers got 'em. Scavengers attacking the caravans, and mutant son of a dog if they weren't springing up like rabbits with a mission. Had to have an army of guards with just to do a deal. Everywhere. Hell, seemed like you couldn't fart without hitting one. But mostly in the northwest. Needed to see what was there. Maybe stop whatever was churning them boogers out. We thought we were prepared. Were we wrong? We mounted an expedition. God, Richard Gray led a small group of us up there. Richard Gray was a doctor. A little older than me, and friend was he smart. He found the source. Some sort of old military base. We lost a lot of folks getting in there. Because it was like someone went bargain shopping at Mutant Land. Phew, cheaper by the dozens. Can't figure any other reason except that being the factory. We got pretty far inside. Wasn't a lot of us left by then. Gray, me, and a couple of others. One of them robots got Francine. Mark was wounded. Sent him back to the surface. Then it was just me and Gray. To this day, I don't know. He never made it back here, and, well, I couldn't face the wasteland again, so I never looked. We made it to some sort of central core, like a plant of some sort. That's when it happened. A robot crane crashed into us. Last I saw Gray, he was flying through the air and into some sort of acid bath. I was in bad shape and, well, I passed out. No, you idiot! I just said I never saw him again, didn't I? Well, I have no idea. Woke up in the wasteland, barely hanging on. Got lucky, and some traders I knew found me days later. Good thing, since I was already changing. They brought me here, and here I've been since. All I know is it was something inside that base. How the hell should I know? Gray would have known if anybody could. Anyway, that's how the deal went down.
That's quite the tragic tale, and it would have been a tragic end for a man who, while possibly being a murderer, seemed to have been actively trying to remake himself into something better. The thing is, even though Richard wasn't able to continue building himself up into the decent man he seemed to be, he would still end up being remade all the same, just not in a way he, nor anyone else could have ever predicted.
Of course.
Mutants are best equipped to deal with the world today.
Who else?
The ghouls?
Please.
Normals?
They brought nuclear death to us all. This will be the age of mutants.
Mutants.
a psychically powered horror of several minds and scraps of technology that defies all reason and all logic. A creature that looks to be in just as much pain as it is painful to look at them. The aesthetics of characters like these are some of the most disturbing things in all of fiction. Sitting in a pool of melted flesh and blood is a computer monitor with torn and ripped flesh stretched tightly over its face, with sores and errant strands of skin scattered about what you might have once been able to call a body, and odd appendages in an agonizing visage, only adding to the horror of this technological mutant creature. Something that isn't quite a man, but isn't quite a monster either, with a face that may have once belonged to Richard Gray, serving as an ever-present reminder that this is no mere horror out of the darkest of tales, but something that was once a human being, like you or I. A beast whose body isn't relegated to the platform it rests on, but the surrounding area as well, if the description you receive when walking through the corridor of revulsion is any indicator. The hairs on the back of your neck rise. You feel something from the corridor ahead. The bile rises as you recognize the mass of flesh ahead, human parts in the wall itself. The worst part is that it is moving, calling to you. Your nose starts to bleed. You hear voices in your head. They are calling your name. Darkness washes over your eyes for a moment, but you recover. A voice calls to you. You turn your head and see the image of a forgotten friend, obviously dead. The worms fall from her rotted jaw as your headache grows. It is getting harder to move forward. Your foot seems bonded to the floor. You look down, and the flesh of the floor is crawling up your leg. Teeth gnaw at your knees. Still, your headache gets worse. Something catches your attention, a flash of movement from the ceiling, and then a sliver of bone pierces your eye. With it comes the thoughts of the dead and tortured. The pain in your head is maddening. You feel the sins of others wash over your soul, and it gets worse as your sins answer them. Like madmen, they fight through your psyche, and in the process, tear your personality apart. Your head is pulsing with the intrusive thoughts of others. The pain grows and grows. Suddenly, as if it never existed, the pain vanishes. You fall to the ground and weep, but something does not feel right. More unsettling than the master's appearance, though, is their voice. A garbled and error-prone mess of several voices belonging to some of the unlucky few who have already been assimilated into the master's own body and mind. And with these dreaded lines, we're given a glimpse into the madness of a mind connected to perhaps thousands of others, and the potential eternal torment of that mind, as well as those minds that have been absorbed, as they fight within their host for any semblance of individuality and freedom that they can possibly find in such a wretched state of being. But again, this was once a person, several of them in fact, and fortunately for us, we're given some insight into the beginnings of Richard's transformation into this monstrosity through a holodisc found in Mariposa Base. A holodisc labeled Richard Gray's Audio Diary. I'm dying. I need to get this down before the pain overwhelms me. I can't believe that I was finally able to drag myself out of that vat. The slime did not affect me, but I nearly drowned. I don't know what happened to Harold. He was standing right next to me when the crane knocked me into the vat. He must have been killed, or he would have tried to help me. Francine is dead, killed by one of those robots. I have no idea how much time has passed. I was able to hack the computer to turn off the robots and record this, but now my mind is slipping away. There is much pain. The green slime that I was immersed in is the source of all the mutations we trace to here. My skin is starting to fester and peel. In other areas, it is bubbling and is expelling a green, mucus-like substance. Some days, the pain is almost tolerable. I can actually walk a few steps again. It seems inconceivable that I dragged myself all the way up here from the vat room. Strangely, I'm actually feeling stronger, though I'm still in a lot of pain. Everything seems to be getting smaller. I think I consumed one of the mutated things scurrying around here today. Some sort of tendril had sprang from my stomach and covered the poor creature. As soon as it had sucked the rodent into my gut, I could actually feel its mind, I think. There is the very real possibility that I'm going slowly insane and can no longer differentiate between what is real and what is a hallucination. Maybe I'm still slowly dying in the vat, and I've imagined all this. Things are becoming more clear to me every day. This toxin has actually improved my mind. I feel that I can understand even the most complex philosophical questions, simply and directly. It's as if all the layers of artifice have been stripped away. I wonder what would happen if I submerged an animal in the vats for a prolonged period of time. Would it gain awareness? The strangest thing is happening to the animals. They actually become smarter and more aware of their surroundings. I dipped a dog and a rat at the same time today, and they were fused together. It's not quite two creatures anymore, but it's more than one. Perhaps this is the future, a coming together of different creatures in some sort of harmonious unity. I no longer consume the different animals I create simply for sustenance. I have become the instrument through which unity will be achieved. I am so much more than a human being now. It's time to bring others into the glory that is the unity. A lost soul is finally strayed into my home. I was so surprised I consumed him before dipping. A mistake I shall not make again. His mind was so primitive as to be repulsive to my refined cognitive abilities. I've begun to modify myself to be more pleasing to the unity by injecting small doses of the virus into my body. The slime in the vats is a man-made virus called the forced evolutionary virus. This information was acquired from my newly grown Neuralink with the base computer. The few wanderers that have found their way here have been a disappointment to me. They can't seem to mutate correctly. The best I've been able to create are some big and dumb mutants. Most can recall nothing from before I initiated them into the wondrous unity. I only feed on them for fuel now. Their minds are nothing to me. Oh glorious creator, I have succeeded in spreading the complete joy of unification to another soul. Unlike the others, his total radiation count was low. I believe this is the factor we've been overlooking all this time, as it seems the conversion is more successful in the cases with less radiation damage. I have never known such glory as I felt when taking his mind into our own. We are beginning to create an army dedicated to unifying the wonderful diversity of life. We have trained them to continue our work here, while we search out more populated areas to take into ourselves. We are beginning to feel the limitations of a body that is mobile. We must find a permanent home, with a greater store of knowledge and a steady supply of biomass. We have stopped increasing ourselves until we can find this new unification center. When we have arrived, we will continue to grow and feed until we have brought peace and unity to the entire world. These words chronicle the very beginning of the entity that would come to be known as the Master and the philosophy it developed. A mutated creature that held within its mind only a semblance of the man that it had evolved from, that spent 50 years in the darkness of Mariposa, experimenting on unassuming creatures and perfecting their plan. Even so, it was Richard Gray who transformed into the Master, and it was Richard Gray's mind that was in control. So perhaps it's in Richard Gray's story that we can find the basis for this new ideology of unification, born from the corrupted mind of the Master. Now all we really know about what kind of person Richard was is based off of what others have said about him. As the only bit of information we're given that comes directly from him, the audio diary I mentioned for you a moment ago, doesn't really clue us into what kind of man he may have been, nor does anything he says after he's become the Master. So the information we're given about Richard from others is all we have to go off of as far as understanding who he might have been before he transformed. That information being that he was possibly a murderer, according to Lynette, and that he was supposedly a doctor, a philosopher, and a good man, according to Harold. As we've already discussed, we have no way of knowing whether or not Richard was actually a murderer, but Harold seems to be a reliable enough source, so I'm willing to believe Richard truly was a good man before his transformation. However, even though we can't confirm whether or not he was a murderer, his development of his unity philosophy following his evolution might make a bit more sense if he was. As you heard earlier, Richard began experimenting with organic life when he started to feel the enhancements to his mind that the FEV granted him, and he began wondering what would happen if he dipped animals into a vat. Now you could chalk this up to the curious boredom of an increasingly twisted mind, but you could also point to the notion that Richard was a doctor and purported philosopher, two aspects of his person that may have led him towards philosophical musings on the various possibilities surrounding FEV due to his penchant for philosophy, and his willingness to experiment on animals could be explained by the fact that doctors have to familiarize themselves with the more gruesome aspects of sentient life. And both of these things, along with his transformation, may have made it so a little animal experimentation wasn't something he'd shy away from. As for his possible status as a murderer, perhaps it was his willingness to take a life long ago that, in combination with his other traits, made it much easier for Richard to decide that experimentation on, and subsequent assimilation of humans, was the best course of action for him to take in these initial stages. Drawing these conclusions could be a bit of a stretch, as if we follow a more direct line of thinking here, it makes sense that Richard simply formulated his new worldview as a result of the mind-altering experience he was forced to endure. However, every possibility is worth looking into when dissecting a character, and considering these aspects of his character could tie into the development of his philosophy as the Master, I figured I should at least mention them. But let me know what you think down in the comments. Now, as terrifying as the Master's initial experimentation on and assimilation of various creatures and humans was, it's really that unique ideology he developed that serves as the most terrifying aspect of his character. For if he were just an amalgamated mutant monstrosity dwelling in the depths of a forgotten military base, who ensnared any unfortunate creature that wandered into his domain, into his web, then the Master would be little more than a monster. A grotesque and nightmare-inducing monster to be sure, but a monster nonetheless. No, it's the Unity plan that truly makes him horrifying. A plan to turn all viable humans and animals into mutants, and assimilate them into the Master's hive mind, so they might remake the world in their image, and bring about a golden age of sapient life on this planet. An age where the horrors of a past that reduced this world to a smoldering ruin would not only be forgotten, but be impossible to replicate, due to all life being one with the Master and his vision.
The Unity will bring about the Master race.
Master!
One able to survive, or even
Thrive.
in the wasteland. As long as there are differences, we will
Tear ourselves apart!
fighting each other. We need one race,
Race!
one goal,
Goal!
one people to move forward to our destiny. Of course.
Mutants are best equipped to deal with the world today.
Who else?
The ghouls?
Please.
Normals?
They brought nuclear death to us all. This will be the age of mutants.
At its core, the Unity plan is quite simple, and it's frightening in its simplicity. But the execution of it turned out to be not so simple. As we learned, the success rate of mutating people and animals with higher rad counts was rather low, with the rates between 15 to 20% when converting contaminated individuals. But his fortunes would begin to change 50 years following his transformation in 2152, when he happened upon Morpheus and his doomsday cultists, people who the Master, rather than attempting to mutate, recruited into his army as spies that he could use to gain crucial intel that might allow him to push his plans forward. Intel would soon come in the form of a caravan of vault dwellers 3 years later, whom the Master captured, interrogated, and subsequently assimilated into themselves after they learned the location of the Boneyard Vault, a prototype vault that he would conquer and move to use as his base of operations, ordering Morpheus and his followers afterwards to renovate the untouched cathedral that lay above it and establish the religious organization known as the Children of the Cathedral to serve as a front for unity. The cathedral is a sanctuary for the human race. When the apocalypse fell on this foul city, the cathedral was spared, which allowed for the birth of the Master. Thus a healing darkness emerged from a terrible light. The plan from this point on was centered around spreading the Master's message, which Unity accomplished via the children's infiltration of various human settlements, and by conquering the remaining vaults to bolster his forces with more intelligent creatures that could accelerate Unity's domination of the world by several magnitudes. In this capacity, the Master's army would end up continuing and amplifying the evil they'd already sowed in the world, with unsuspecting viable candidates guided to the cathedral by the children to begin becoming one with the Master, or begin the process of becoming super mutants, or the dreaded stealth boy-equipped Nightkin at Mariposa, or perhaps worse, a centaur or a floater. Hideous creatures that were devised through copious amounts of genetic experimentation with different species by the Master. Mutants and beasts that were then sent to rampage across the land to raid caravans and settlements so they could capture any viable candidates to bolster the Master's forces. Something they attempted to do in Necropolis, with the conquering of that settlement and subsequent vassalage of Set and the ghouls under his command. Several of the Master's top mutants and men would be responsible for doing his bidding or spreading his message as well, with the likes of the smug lieutenant overseeing operations at Mariposa and overseeing abductions, and Father Lasher, a sadistic and brutal piece of work who believed in using pain to guide people on the proper course to becoming one with the Master's vision. A man who we can attribute lovely quotes like this to: "Learn to embrace pain as your closest friend, for pain is the most instructive force in the universe. Break yourself until you can exist no longer as an individual, then remake yourself into the Master's tool. That is the solution to all of your problems." Zealous religious fervor was a mainstay of the Master's organization, with the minds of mutants and humans alike twisted just as much as the mutants' bodies were, a significant dedication to their Master's will that may have been exacerbated by the psychic connection that they shared with him. Experimentation would continue at this time as well, with 4 mutants known as Psychers being created by the Master in an attempt to mimic his own psychic powers and add a powerful new force to his army. But according to the Fallout Bible, most of these experiments were failures and resulted in insanity, or they were used to line the corridor of revulsion to serve as a psychic barrier to the Master's inner sanctum. Aside from the abductions and murders though, one of the more terrifying aspects of the Master's organization is the amount of brainwashing that the children are responsible for. In the cathedral, we find loyal followers who only sing the Master's praises. People sat in front of flickering TV screens that serve as visual aids to rewire their minds into extensions of the Master's will, all of which are a prelude to the assimilation that would be the ultimate brainwashing, a complete melding of the mind and body with that of the Masters to create the perfect superbeing. Now, all the terror that the Master and his army accomplished in service to unity is exactly that, terrifying. But in this story, we're given glimpses of something infinitely more terrifying, what could have been. As many of you will be aware, at the end of Fallout 1, the Vault Dweller manages to deal the killing blow to the Master, either through brute force or by breaking his spirit by pointing out to him a fatal flaw in his plan, that flaw being that mutants are sterile and can't reproduce, which causes him to lose faith in his plan and admit defeat, thus rendering his vision for the future nothing more than a nightmarish failure. But in looking through nearly everything there is to know about the Master and the world he attempted to create, we find a portrait of the future that awaited this world should the Master's plans have succeeded. First and foremost would have been an almost total lack of individuality for any sapient creature on this planet. We can see through our interactions with certain supermutants that they do retain a personality, but on the whole, whatever personality a mutant had prior to their transformation is A, overridden by their new one, and B, their connection to the Master. And while the fact that a person's mind and body are consumed by the transformation process is a harrowing thought, it's in that connection to the Master's own mind that we find a mystery that could potentially hold the most horrifying aspect of the Master's character. For the question is the mind of a mutant connected to, or a person consumed by the Master, placed in a state of unending peace, born from a cohesive melding of minds that eliminated all need for conflict and discord in the world? Or is it an eternal torture in a prison filled with thousands upon thousands of minds, all screaming in unison, in a cacophony of never-ending horror, as they buck against their hive-minded chains? I feel as if the latter might be more likely. Because if you consider that there seems to be some semblance of Richard left in the Master, owing to the fact that his personality as the Master seems to regress back into who he once was, once you reveal the truth about mutant sterility to him, it stands to reason that each mind the Master has warped or consumed also retains aspects of their former selves, which leads me to believe that to be a part of the Unity is to be placed in an eternal mental prison from which there is no escape. Whichever is true, the fact remains that there were few individuals who willingly gave themselves up to mutation, rendering one's integration into the Unity as a forced affair that's heaped upon you by one man and his dire vision for this broken world, and not something that many people who succumb to the Master's machinations have any say in. Which at the very least, regardless of the potential impact on a person's mind, means that nearly every single person targeted by the Master's forces went kicking and screaming to their vats, where they were then transformed into mutant monstrosities. But perhaps the most dreadful vision of the future we're given in this story can be found in a quote from Father Lasher I mentioned earlier. The cathedral is a sanctuary for the human race. When the apocalypse fell on this foul city, the cathedral was spared, which allowed for the birth of the Master. Thus a healing darkness emerged from a terrible light. A healing darkness emerged from a terrible light, and darkness it is. Richard Gray, the Master, was forged in the darkness of Mariposa Military Base, and it is in that darkness that he concocted his Unity plan, and the world that he would have created would have been similarly mired in darkness. In the bowels of the cathedral vault, we find the Master's lair, a dank and dimly lit ruin of a fortress pulsing with the rotting mutated flesh that lines the walls, perhaps a vision of what lies within the warrens of the Master's hive mind and the constant mental state of all caught in its web, a technological and organic terror that's devoid of all the intricacies of life in favor of the stability of a dark and nebulous oneness. Despite the decrepit state of the Master's mind palace though, they weren't capable of blotting out the sun, and had he succeeded, the surface world, as damaged as it is, would have remained as bright and vibrant as ever. Though that's true, that luminescence would be darkened by the new overlords of this planet, the Master's mutants, creatures forced against their will to become who they are, who live out the rest of their reeking and rotted existence as slaves to a cause they never wished to join. And so the darkness of the Master's mind brings ever more darkness to the physical world that it would have consumed. That was supposed to be the utopia of the Master's vision, a place where all is in harmony, in sickening terror, a dark world made darker by the light that birthed it, and the holy flame that reforged it in its image. But the Master is gone. His dream for the future is dead, and with no being that has come since able to replicate his telepathic prowess, in all likelihood, it will remain in the same grave that its creator was buried in. However, though they are gone, the Master's influence can still be felt across the wastelands. Much of the Master's army was decimated when the Vault Dweller brought him his ultimate end, but not all of it. Many super mutants survived the destruction of their master, and a great number of them would go on to cause havoc and destruction in their own right. The armies of the mutants Gamorrean and Adis would attempt to create their own organizations that would rival the Master's army and potentially carry out their mission in their stead, but they would both ultimately be eliminated in much the same manner that their former lord was. On a smaller scale, and anywhere from 80 to 120 years later, a few Nightkin like Tabitha and Jacob would go on to found new civilizations like the Unity Remnant in Broken Hills, Utobitha, and Jacob's Town. But due to long-term stealth boy use, many Nightkin were functionally insane and lived quite the tormented existence. A notable and relatively more lucid example being Davison and his Brahmin skull-worshipping Nightkin, and a more tragic example being Dog and God, the tormented DID-inflicted Nightkin in service to Father Elijah. But while some Nightkin and super mutants were left better off than others, most either shared the same gruesome fate as the likes of Davison and Dog and God, or perished as they were subsequently hunted down by organizations like the Brotherhood of Steel, relegating the legacy of the Master to one of failure, death, destruction, and lasting torment. Now, as horrifying as the Master and their plans were, in many ways, it was a creature that deserves to be pitied, but to what degree is up for debate. The man the Master was born from, Richard Grey, certainly deserves to be pitied, for though he may have been a murderer, it would be the treacherous world of men and their technological and biological monstrosities that would first take everything from him once the bombs dropped, and everything he had left when he fell into that vat of FEV. As the Master, perhaps Richard deserves to be pitied still, a man who was slowly warped into a monster that may have been just as tormented as the many lives he destroyed and consumed. Especially when you hear his crestfallen realization of the futility of his movement, when you break the news of the mutant sterility to him. An aspect of his character that sort of turns the Master into a tragic figure, for all the pain he endured and caused was ultimately for nothing.
I must digest this information. One moment. I understand now. You made a clever forgery. You made this up to fool me.
Fool!
Me.
But it cannot be. This would mean that
All my work.
has been for nothing. Everything that I've tried to...
A failure!
It can't
Be.
be. I don't think that I can continue
Continue?
to have done the things I have done in the name of progress and healing. It was madness. I can see that now. Madness.
Madness?
There is no hope. Leave now. Leave while you still have.
Hope.
Even so, what pity we can offer the creature that Richard became is minimal when you compare their plight to what they did and what could have been. And though the Master's story is one entirely born from the follies of man, the follies of a creature that would turn the entire world into one sentient lump of mutated flesh and steel for the sake of peace and prosperity cannot be ignored. For it was in the darkness of a world where light had decimated nearly everything that the Master and his hordes found salvation. And it was darkness that was poised to rule the earth as a result, an overcorrection of sickening proportions that would have ended all life as we know it on this planet, more so than it had already been ended. As a Fallout villain, no. As a villain in general, the Master is as terrifying as they come. A creature of mangled voices and limbs who desired total domination and corruption of the world for the sake of unity. An admirable goal, but a misguided one. One that was born from a man gone mad who became a living nightmare and viciously insane fiend that was consumed by evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on the Master? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you liked this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, my patrons, my members, anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank, and especially Elijah Kai VA, our Dark Lord channel member. And a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and subreddit to interact with myself and the community. and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.